Chapter 13 of The Cat of Bubastes, A Tale of Ancient Egypt. This recording is in the public domain. The Cat of Bubastes by G.A. Henty. Chapter 13. The Search for Mysa. "Perhaps Ruth had gone to tell my mother that Mysa was lost," Chebron suggested when Jethro had gone so far in his story. "That could hardly have been," Jethro replied, "for I should have told you that your mother returned early this morning to the house with many relatives, and that all were weeping and mourning round the body of your father. Had Ruth gone to her, she would either have returned with her, or Lyptis would have heard where she was." "Did you hear how my mother bore her misfortunes, Jethro?" "She was overwhelmed with grief," Lyptis said, "at your father's death. So overwhelmed that she seemed to have no thought for anything else. She had, of course, been told the night before that Mysa was missing, but it seemed to make no impression upon her. She only said that doubtless friends had carried her off to save her from the danger that Chebron's wickedness had brought upon us all. This morning she made some further inquiries, but did not seem in any serious alarm; but the magistrates, when they came last night to inquire into the whole matter, took note of Mysa having been carried off, and when on their coming again this morning they found that nothing had been heard of her, gave orders that a search should be made for her, and a proclamation was issued this afternoon denouncing punishment on those who carried her off, and enjoining all who could give any information on the subject to present themselves before them immediately. Since I came out from the house I have been wandering about trying to think what is best to be done, and hoping that something might occur to me which would put me upon the track of the villains who carried Mysa off." "You do not think of carrying out our plans for tomorrow, Jethro?" Chebron asked anxiously. "We could never go away from here in ignorance of what had become of her." "Certainly not, Chebron. I consider it my duty, as well as my inclination, to stay here until she is found. Your father spoke to me of her as well as of you, but as he did not see any way in which we could aid her, he said that she must take her chance, meaning take her chance under the guardianship of your mother, to obtain some day a husband whom she could love. But the present misfortune entirely alters the case. She has need of our active help, and whatever are the risks we must postpone our start. Whether you will be able to stay here or not is doubtful. Each day that passes without news being received of your capture in the provinces north of us will increase the belief that you are hiding somewhere in the neighborhood of the city, and in that case the search will become more and more earnest. However, for a day or two we may be safe here. As to that, though, we must abide by Chigron's opinion. He is running no small risk in concealing us here, and if he considers the danger is becoming greater than he is willing to run, we must betake ourselves to the hills. There are lonely spots there where we could lie concealed for a long time, or at least as long as such supplies of food and water as we could carry with us hold out. But at any rate we must set aside all thought of flight for the present, and devote all our energies to the discovery and rescue of Mysa." "I do not think we have far to look for the contrivers of the outrage," Amuba said. "It seems to me that it is of a piece with the whole of the misfortunes that have befallen us. We know that Ameres refused the request of Ptylus for Mysa as a wife for his son. After that came the plot which we overheard in the temple for the murder of someone. The knowledge that they were overheard put a stop to that scheme. Then came the stirring up of the people, partly by the story of that unfortunate cat, partly by whispers that Ameres, although high priest of Osiris, was yet a scorner of the gods. Then came the attack upon the house, in which, while the main body of the mob attacked Ameres, a chosen band carried off Mysa. This villain Ptylus had several motives to spur him on. In the first place there was anger at the rejection of his son's suit; next, that he would, at the death of Ameres, naturally succeed to the high priesthood; thirdly, he may have thought that if he could obtain possession of Mysa and marry her to his son, she would bring with her no small portion of her father's lands as a dowry. With the influence which he, as high priest, would have with the king and council he could rely upon her obtaining a share of the estate, especially as the villain would calculate that Chebron as well as his father would be put out of the way. He has only to keep Mysa immured until his power as high priest is consolidated, and then if he gain the consent of the king to the match Mysa could not refuse to accept the fate prepared for her." "I think that you have accurately reasoned out the case, Amuba, and that we have penetrated the whole conspiracy. The question is, what are we to do?" "It must not be, Jethro!" Chebron cried excitedly, pacing up and down the chamber. "Mysa cannot bear Plexo. She spoke of him with something like horror when she heard of the proposal Ptylus made. I do not like him myself. He is thin lipped and crafty and cruel. Mysa had better be dead than married to him." "I think I can promise you, Chebron," Jethro said grimly, "that that marriage shall never come about. We may not find Mysa, who may be hidden either in Ptylus's house, or in one of the many chambers of the temple, or in the caves near it, but at any rate I can find Plexo, and before we leave Egypt I will slay him as well as his father, whom I regard as the murderer of Ameres. I may not be able to do this and to get away, and in that case you must journey alone; but I am not going to quit Egypt and leave them to enjoy the gains of their crime." As he finished speaking Chigron entered. "I was coming in to see if Jethro had returned." He was told the reasons for his prolonged absence, the abduction of Mysa, and the determination to remain and search for her place of concealment. He shook his head. "It is a rash resolution. Even were you free to come and go as you choose, your chance of finding out her hiding place would be small indeed. Hunted as you yourselves are, your quest seems to be an absolutely hopeless one. As to your remaining here long, I think it would be madness. It is not only for myself that I say this, but for you. In the first place, there are so many men employed here that your coming in and going out would be sure to be noticed by some one. In the second place, the cave would scarcely escape search a second time. Were it not for my workmen I could conceal you in the house, and if I saw men in search of you approaching I could place you in one of the inner casings of the mummies, and put 2 or 3 more casings on. Then, lying as you would be among a number of corpses in a similar state of advancement toward burial, none would think of opening the cases. But with so many people about it would be well nigh impossible to do this without observation, unless indeed the search was made at night or after the workmen had departed, which would hardly be likely to happen. Therefore I think it impossible for you to stay here more than another day or two. But there are many caves and burial places higher up on the hillside where you might be concealed. In many of these there are sarcophagi. If we choose one in which there are several coffins I can remove the mummies and their casings into another cave, so that should a party of searchers approach the place you can lie down in the sarcophagus and lower the lid down upon you." "It would be a sacrilege to move the dead," Chebron said with a shudder. "It would be sacrilege for others," Chigron replied, "but not to us, whose business and duty it is to handle the dead. I can replace the mummies in their cases after you have left, and they will be none the worse for their temporary removal. It will be necessary, of course, that there should be no signs of habitation in the cave, nothing to excite their suspicions that it has been disturbed." "I think that is a very good plan," Jethro said. "We can make sleeping places in the open air near. We shall sleep in the open air on our journey, and it would be no hardship to begin at once. I should think it best to remove to one of these caves at once. There is never any saying when the searchers may be here again; therefore if you will, Chigron, I will at early daybreak go with you, choose a cave, and make our arrangements." "I think indeed that that will be the best plan," the embalmer agreed. "I will, of course, take care to bring you up every night a store of provisions. And now I will leave you to sleep." It was long, however, before the occupants of the chamber threw themselves upon their piles of rushes. Sometimes they talked of Mysa, and discussed all possible plans for discovering where she was concealed. Then they wondered what had become of Ruth, who would be friendless in the great city, and might not have money sufficient to buy a meal with her. "She had her ornaments," Jethro said. "A silver bracelet that Mysa gave her she always wore. She had 2 silver necklaces and earrings of her own. I should think they had been handed down to her from her mother. They seemed good and would fetch money. Ruth is a shrewd little maid, for though but 15 years old she has long been accustomed to manage a house and look after her grandfather. Why she has run away I cannot think, except that perhaps from the noise and tumult she thought that all were going to be killed. But even in that case she would probably have found her way back by this morning, if not sooner." "I cannot help thinking myself," Chebron said, "that she has followed Mysa. Although she has not been here for many months, I am sure that she was very fond of her." "That she certainly was," Jethro said. "I often thought when I was walking behind them that it was pretty to see them together. Mysa knew so much more of everything, and yet it was the Hebrew maid who gave her opinion most decidedly, and Mysa listened to her as she talked in that